Daniel chapter 10 verse 1 to Daniel chapter 11 verse 1. In the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a revelation was given to Daniel, who was called Belteshazzar. Its message was true, and it concerned a great war. The understanding of the message came to him in a vision. At that time I, Daniel, mourned for 3 weeks. I ate no choice food. No meat or wine touched my lips, and I used no lotions at all until the 3 weeks were over. On the 24th day of the 1st month, as I was standing on the bank of the great river, the Tigris, I looked up, and there before me was a man dressed in linen, with a belt of fine gold from Uphaz around his waist. His body was like topaz, his face like lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and his voice like the sound of a multitude. I, Daniel, was the only one who saw the vision. Those who were with me did not see it, but such terror overwhelmed them that they fled and hid themselves. So I was left alone, gazing at this great vision. I had no strength left. My face turned deathly pale, and I was helpless. Then I heard him speaking, and as I listened to him, I fell into a deep sleep, my face to the ground. A hand touched me and set me trembling on my hands and knees. He said, "Daniel, you who are highly esteemed, consider carefully the words I am about to speak to you, and stand up, for I have now been sent to you." And when he said this to me, I stood up trembling. Then he continued, "Do not be afraid, Daniel. Since the first day that you set your mind to gain understanding and to humble yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I have come in response to them. But the prince of the Persian kingdom resisted me 21 days. Then Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, because I was detained there with the king of Persia. Now I have come to explain to you what will happen to your people in the future, for the vision concerns a time yet to come." While he was saying this to me, I bowed with my face toward the ground and was speechless. Then one who looked like a man touched my lips, and I opened my mouth and began to speak. I said to the one standing before me, "I am overcome with anguish because of the vision, my Lord, and I feel very weak. How can I, your servant, talk with you, my Lord? My strength is gone, and I can hardly breathe." Again, the one who looked like a man touched me and gave me strength. "Do not be afraid, you who are highly esteemed," he said. "Peace, be strong now. Be strong." When he spoke to me, I was strengthened and said, "Speak, my Lord, since you have given me strength." So he said, "Do you know why I have come to you? Soon I will return to fight against the prince of Persia, and when I go, the prince of Greece will come. But first I will tell you what is written in the book of truth. No one supports me against them except Michael, your prince. And in the 1st year of Darius the Mede, I took my stand to support and protect him." Good morning, everybody. If you're wondering what has happened to me, this is the result of wrestling with the text all week. But I blame Pastor Richard, because Richard got me into mountain biking, and he said that I need to get onto my bike more often. But the problem is, when you get on your bike more often, you fall off more often. So that's what happened on Wednesday morning. I went out for a ride. I was trying to be a cowboy and jumped over a ramp and landed flat on my face. But I am okay. So I want to just tell you a bit of a story that happened in my home. We have got a box of Duplo, and every now and then my kids and I will sit and we'll build some crazy cool things. And on one particular day, Katie and I were sitting building a mansion, this beautiful house laid brick by brick. Katie lost interest pretty quickly, but I was in the zone. It had a double garage. It had a garden. It was really amazing. I was very proud of my efforts. But then, like the stone in Daniel chapter 2, out of nowhere, Katie came and she bashed down my whole house. And I was so angry. And ever since then, I've wanted to bash something down and take revenge. Anyway, so Richard has been taking you through Daniel for the past few weeks. And brick by brick, he's been building a beautiful structure. But Rich is in Durban, and I'm here today. So I guess what's going to happen? Just kidding, guys. I still want to work here. So that is my sermon opener in Preaching 101 class. You've got to have a great sermon opener, a beautiful hook that links. This has nothing to do with the rest of my sermon. However, I'm going to bring us straight into the context of today's passage, Daniel chapter 10. So Daniel, by this stage, is an old man. He's 84 years old, and he has seen a lot over the course of his lifetime. As a teenage boy, he was exiled from his hometown in Judah, carried off to Babylon. God gave him the ability to interpret dreams. And before long, he is promoted because of this gift that he has, promoted to personally serve King Nebuchadnezzar in his courts. But things didn't always go well for Daniel. We know that there was a time where he experienced persecution for his faith, thrown in a pit of lions. Daniel was given the ability to not only interpret dreams, but to prophesy events in the future. He was given visions and had encounters with the angel Gabriel. So he's seen a tremendous amount over the course of his life. One thing that he saw was the overthrow of the Babylonian kingdom at the hands of the Medes and the Persians. And as this was happening, Jeremiah, the prophet, had written these writings that Daniel was spending time reading, and he realized that Jeremiah predicted that the exile of the Jews in Babylon would last 70 years. And he had a light bulb moment because he realized that the time that period was over. That Israel had gone through the 70-year period of punishment, and surely the Lord was going to rescue them. He was going to send them back home. And we know from Daniel chapter 9, with great zeal, he pleads with God on behalf of the nation. He repents, and he pleads with God to have mercy, to send the Jewish people back home to Judah. So you can imagine the joy when King Cyrus issues a decree, not long after this prayer, allowing Jews to go home, to establish themselves again as a people, to rebuild their temple. It's amazing how in chapter 9, verse 23, the angel Gabriel, who appears to him while Daniel is praying, says, "As soon as you began to pray, a word went out, which I've come to tell you, for you are highly esteemed." Daniel's prayer was answered. And we're not told how he would have responded to this news, but I just picture this old man getting on his knees and weeping with joy, thanking God for his mercy. Soon after the Jews arrived back in Judah, they begin the critical work of rebuilding the temple that had been destroyed. And again, imagine when the news reached Daniel, how this man would have rejoiced and celebrated. Because God's name was indelibly linked with the temple. Since the days of Solomon, God was worshipped in the temple. And rebuilding it would once again bring honor to the Lord's name. So it's joyful, it's a time of celebration, but at some point, Daniel is smacked with a major disappointment. Because not long after the Jewish people had begun rebuilding this temple, in the book of Ezra, we read that it was halted. This whole campaign to rebuild was stopped. There were non-Jewish people living in the land who were hostile towards the Jewish people. And they started paying bribes to King Cyrus's counselors to try and convince King Cyrus to put a stop to this whole temple rebuilding. And Daniel would have been shocked at this. How is it possible? I thought the promise was supposed to be fulfilled. He would have been saddened at the state of what was going on back home. Confused. Have you ever experienced a setback in your life like this, where things were going well, you thought a prayer was being answered, and then just the rug gets pulled out, and you're shocked and you're disappointed? It's this particular situation that Daniel found himself in that brings us to verse 2 of our text today. This is what he says. At that time, I, Daniel, mourned for 3 weeks. I ate no choice food, no meat or wine touched my lips, and I used no lotions at all until the 3 weeks were over. Daniel was grieving. He fasted from certain foods and certain drinks, and he chose not to put lotion on his face. Lotion was symbolic of rejoicing and refreshing, and it would have just been inappropriate. But the Daniel that we know, as we've done character studies on this man, the Daniel that we know wouldn't have sat in his room feeling sorry for himself for 3 weeks, because this is a man who prayed. In Daniel chapter 2, early on, Nebuchadnezzar has this incredible vision of this statue. And at first, Daniel doesn't understand it. So what does he do? He goes home with his friends and he prays. God, help me understand what this means. Daniel chapter 6, Darius the Mede issues a decree. No one is allowed to worship any god or any human being or pray to them other than me. What does Daniel do? He goes home with his windows wide open and he prays. 3 times a day, as was his custom. So far, whenever Daniel was faced with something he didn't understand or some kind of crisis, he prayed. He asked God to give him understanding, and he asked God to act. And so that's what he did during this 3-week period of mourning. He interceded for his nation. He asked God to provide clarity as to why things had gone the way that they had gone. He was so motivated to pray and seek God. This was the time that he was doing this was over Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It would have been weird for someone to not eat. It would have been weird for them to not take part in the celebration. But Daniel is intent on seeking his God, denying himself earthly comforts and pleasures for a time being. And then in verse 1 of our text, we realize that at some point during this 3-week period, Daniel was given a revelation of sorts. We don't know much, not a lot of detail is given to us yet, other than the fact that it concerned a great war. This was the introduction to a final vision that was going to be given to Daniel in chapters 11 and 12. But we do know that Daniel understood the general gist of the message. There were certain details that weren't clear to him yet. He understood parts of it. But the question is why? Why did the revelation that was given to him, why was the full picture not given to him? Why was he only given sort of bits and pieces at this stage? And it seems as though Daniel wasn't quite ready yet. Daniel needed something first. And so we read now in verse 4 that Daniel has an encounter. On the 24th day of the first month, as I was standing on the bank of the great river, the Tigris, I looked up, and there before me was a man dressed in linen, with a belt of fine gold from Uphaz around his waist. His body was like topaz, his face like lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and his voice sounded like that of a multitude. Daniel was the only one who saw the vision. Those who were with me did not see it, but such terror overwhelmed them that they fled and they hid themselves. So I was left alone gazing at this great vision. I had no strength left. My face turned deathly pale and I was helpless. And then I heard him speaking. And as I listened to him, I fell into a deep sleep, my face to the ground. This is wild stuff. I mean, we'd be pretty used to it by now, right, in the book of Daniel. But we're going to pause because I know you all have questions. What's the first question that pops into your mind as you read this encounter? When can we get out of here? No. Who is this? Who's this man dressed in linen? Well, we're going to figure it out together, but what I can tell you right now is that it is not David Hasselhoff. I know the burnished bronze thing, would lead some to believe that. But what I want all of us to do is we can track on the screen or open our Bibles to the book of Revelation, the last book of the Bible. We're going to read the first chapter. And we're going to read an encounter that the Apostle John has with a figure on the island of Patmos. So can we read from verse 12 together? This is what John says. I turned around to see the voice that was speaking to me, and when I turned, I saw 7 golden lampstands, and among the lampstands was someone like a son of man, dressed in a robe, reaching down to his feet, and with a golden sash around his chest. The hair on his head was white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were like blazing fire. His feet were like bronze glowing in a furnace, and his voice was like the sound of rushing waters. In his right hand he held 7 stars, and coming out of his mouth was a sharp double-edged sword. His face was like the sun shining in all its brilliance. When I saw him, I fell at his feet as though dead. Now, just in case you're not seeing any similarities between the two passages that we've just read, I'm going to pull up no, diagrams are overrated, a table. Sorry, Rich. And I want you just to take a few seconds to look at this table. We've got the passage in Daniel chapter 10 on the left and the passage in Revelation on the right. And I just want you to look and compare. So, just to clarify, who was it that John saw in his vision? Jesus. So who do you think it was who Daniel saw in his? Who said David Hasselhoff? I heard someone. It's Jesus. Guys, this is incredible. This is some 500 odd years before Jesus Christ has come to earth. Daniel has a vision of the pre-incarnate Christ. There are also parallels, by the way, to the encounter that Paul has with Jesus in Acts chapter 9. Because just like Daniel, Paul was not alone when he saw the vision, but no one else saw it, and yet they were absolutely terrified. And just like Daniel and John, Paul also fell down on the ground at the sight of Jesus. And some of you have more questioning minds, and you're probably thinking, are we really going to listen to a half-concussed guy who's just fallen off of his bike? How do we know that this isn't just an angel? I mean, Daniel by the stage is used to being spoken to by Gabriel. Perhaps this is Gabriel. But I think it's important that we just look at a couple of reasons as to why this can't be the case. In the first encounter, chapter 8, that Daniel has with Gabriel, Gabriel is not described in detail like this figure is in chapter 10. We would assume that if they're the same person, then the details of what Gabriel looked like would have been given to Daniel much earlier on. Secondly, although Daniel has a fearful reaction the first time he encounters Gabriel in chapter 8, when Gabriel rocks up again in chapter 9, Daniel's not afraid. It's almost like he's used to Gabriel by this stage. So if the person in chapter 10 was Gabriel, then why did Daniel react in such great fear? And the fear that he experienced in chapter 10 is far greater than that which he experienced in chapter 8. The person that he saw must have been even more glorious and majestic. And it's this third reason, this portrayal of this Son of Man, Jesus Christ, is too majestic for an angel. If you think about the way that Daniel describes this glorious figure that he is seeing, there's no way that it could even be an angel. So you're convinced, you're happy, Daniel has an encounter with Christ. Good? The next question that we should be asking is why? Why does Jesus reveal himself to Daniel in this moment? Well, let's consider the space Daniel's in. He's mourning, he's confused. Perhaps he's starting to lose a bit of hope. Jesus has appeared to Daniel to give him hope. Daniel sees the future king of the nations, and he's given hope. He's had these pictures of Jesus, this coming Messiah. In Daniel chapter 2, we spoke about the stone cut out of the mountain that would smash all other kingdoms. In 7, this one like a son of man, destined to receive glory and a kingdom. In 9, the Messiah who would be ruler and yet who would be cut off. So now to personally see the Messiah in all of his glory and splendor and to experience the trembling and the awe that he did would have just consolidated the fact that Messiah is coming. God is in control. He's in control of my life. He's in control of my people. He's in control of the nations. But I love what happens next. Because as Daniel is left staring at this awesome pre-incarnate Christ, and his strength is gone and the blood is draining from his face, Jesus begins to speak to Daniel. And as Daniel listens to Jesus, he begins to fall asleep. Now, when my kids are scared at night, it doesn't happen every night, but occasionally, of monsters or all sorts of things, hey girls, sometimes Daddy will go and sit on the edge of the bed, and I'll just speak words of comfort to them. I'll just assure them that I'm with them, that they're going to be okay, that they're safe, that they're loved. And it's always incredible to watch the peace just come over their bodies, and they just start to close their eyes and rest and fall asleep. And we don't know. The text doesn't say what Jesus said to Daniel. So it's pure speculation here. But I wouldn't be at all surprised if Jesus is doing the same thing for Daniel. This voice that sounds like a crowd, like a multitude, just a voice of peace over Daniel. It's okay. I'm here. I've got you. I've got this. I don't think Jesus just appeared to Daniel to scare the living daylights out of the guy. Of course, there's awe and there's reverence, and that would have given Daniel great hope. But Jesus appears to Daniel in priestly garments. And the writer of the Hebrews tells us that Jesus is our great high priest. And listen to what he says about our high priest.
Therefore, since we have a great high priest who's ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess, for we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses. And that includes fear and anguish and doubt and mourning, grief. But we have one who has been tempted in every way just as we are. And when I read the New Testament, guys, this is the Jesus that I read about. One who empathizes with human beings, with their grief, with their disillusionment and disappointment, and one who ministers to people in those kinds of spaces. I mean, you think about that account when the disciples are out on the lake on the boat, early hours in the morning. And Jesus begins to walk towards them on the water. And then he looks like a ghost. And they're freaking out. What does Jesus say to them? Take courage, guys. It is I. Don't be afraid. And when Jesus is transfigured before his disciples, and they fall face down, just like Daniel, because they see an image, this picture of his glory, Jesus touches them and says, get up. Don't be afraid. And then after Jesus is resurrected and he appears to his disciples again, and they are petrified. They're hiding in a house with the doors locked, and he stands in their midst. And what's the first thing he says to them? Peace be with you. The heart of Jesus is to give comfort and peace, to ease fear, to provide hope. And Jesus knew that Daniel was in a difficult space. And he instilled, this glorious vision instilled hope for the future. But these kind words also strengthened and encouraged him personally. Daniel, before he receives the vision, this revelation that he'd been given an intro to, has a second encounter. Daniel's lying on the ground, he's fast asleep, and a hand touches him and brings him to his knees. And then this mysterious figure, this second person, I'll explain why it's a second person in a moment, begins to talk to him. We would assume that this is just a flow, this is Jesus, who's now touching him, bringing him to his knees and speaking to him again, but there are actually a few reasons why the second person is not Christ. And just want to touch on those quickly, just to eliminate any confusion. Firstly, this figure who now touches Daniel, brings him to his knees, is apparently engaged in spiritual warfare and has required the help of Michael the angel. Now, if this was Christ, he wouldn't require the help and the support of Michael. Secondly, when Daniel addresses this figure, he uses the term my Lord. And actually, it's more accurately translated sir. This is a term of respect, not of divinity. And also, we've spoken about how the fact that Daniel has encountered Gabriel before, and he seems to be familiar with Gabriel. So it would make sense that there's not this reaction of fear and that he's accustomed to this person who now meets with him. And if it is Gabriel the angel, the second person, that would make sense because he's about to be given this great final revelation. And Gabriel has been the angel that has been tasked with giving Daniel these sorts of messages, these sorts of revelations. So, Daniel is about to receive this final revelation, but the angel Gabriel has three things to do first, three things that Daniel needs, that he needs to give to Daniel. The first one is to strengthen Daniel. And 3 times we see Gabriel touch Daniel gently. And listen to what Daniel says in verse 17. How can I, your servant, talk with you, my Lord? My strength is gone and I can hardly breathe. Again, the one who looked like a man touched me and gave me strength. And then 3 times the angel comforts Daniel with his words. He says, do not be afraid, Daniel. Do not be afraid, you who are highly esteemed. Peace, be strong now, be strong. It's amazing the heart of God for Daniel to strengthen this man, to comfort him in his mourning, but also to prepare him for this great final vision. That God would use an angel like this to touch Daniel, that Jesus himself would strengthen his servant. The second thing that the angel wants to do is to assure Daniel that his prayers have been heard and acted upon right away. Notice what he says to Daniel in verse 12. Do not be afraid, Daniel, since the first day that you set your mind to gain understanding, since the first day, and to humble yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I have come in response to them. And that's exactly what we read in 9 verse 23. I told you to bank it. When Daniel's praying in chapter 9, as soon as you began to pray, a word went out. Every time that Daniel prays in this book, his prayers have been answered. Did you know that not long after this 3-week period of mourning and fasting and praying, the temple rebuilding campaign picked up again? Daniel would have been greatly encouraged that his prayers were not in vain, that God hears me when I pray, and he acts. And when things seem to be taking a turn, it doesn't mean that he's suddenly, out of control. God's perfectly in control. The third thing that the angel wants to do is just to give Daniel a window into the spiritual clash of kingdoms that is going on. And if you were ever in doubt that there is a spiritual clash of kingdoms on the go now, between God and his angels and Satan and his demons, the forces of good and evil, then all you need to do is read what this angel says to Daniel. Because he says, although Daniel, your prayer was immediately heard and I was dispatched straight away, I was actually hindered. In verse 13, he explains to him why he hadn't come sooner. I was resisted by the prince of the Persian kingdom for 21 days. But then I got support from Michael. Later on in verse 20, Gabriel says that once he's given Daniel the rest of the vision in chapter 11, he needs to go back and fight against the prince of Persia again. And then the prince of Greece is going to come. This is hectic stuff. This is spiritual warfare that's on the go. It is highly likely that the halting of the temple back in Judah was influenced spiritually first. And it is highly likely that much of what goes on around us is influenced spiritually first. And we cannot see it, but there is a clash of kingdoms on the go all around us. But we need not fear. Daniel was given such hope through this encounter with Christ. The battle belongs to the Lord. And some of us, the text in the New Testament, we read about how our enemy prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. And I'm not saying that everything that happens to us in our lives is because of some kind of spiritual attack, but we would also be foolish to deny that those things happen. And perhaps you've experienced something like that before, or perhaps you're just in a place right now where you're experiencing some kind of turmoil. Maybe you're grieving. Maybe you're disillusioned. In anguish. You've lost hope. You're weak. You've lost strength. And I know myself, when I'm in spaces like that, my greatest temptation is to try and control the situation myself. And I usually do that in two ways. Either I'll try and control what comes into and out of my life to protect myself. And sadly, I often don't go to God first, but I'll run to something else that might ease the pain or make me feel better. And another way that I like to control when I'm in a difficult situation is to do whatever I can to fix it. I go into fix-it mode. And I know that we live in a culture where we do that a lot. We live independently so often of God. But Daniel didn't do that. When Daniel heard the news about the temple that was not being built anymore, he didn't try to catch the next train to go back to Judah and see if he could sort out the problem. He didn't phone up King Cyrus and say, hey, listen, what's going on here? What did he do? He was a man of prayer, and he went to God in prayer. And that's what he could control, his prayer life. It was always his first reaction. And that's why Daniel is called one who is highly esteemed, because he was a man who sought God humbly, who depended upon God. And not just when crisis hit. This was his routine. And in a minute, we're going to sing a familiar song that really speaks about how our fight is on our knees, with our hands lifted high, that the battle belongs to God. And I want to challenge you, when crisis hits, and even when it doesn't, to make it part of your routine to be people of prayer, to fight on your knees in prayer, to be like Daniel, to seek God. James 5:16 says, the prayer of a righteous person is powerful and effective. God loves it when we come to him in prayer and when we ask boldly. And we can be confident this morning that he hears our prayers straight away and he acts. He doesn't always answer our prayers in the way that we want them to be answered or in our timing, but he always answers in line with his will, in line with his glory and what's good for us. Instead of just trying to fix our lives all the time, let's be people who trust God greatly, who seek him. And when it's concerning a spiritual clash of kingdoms, we're not called to directly engage with the devil and bind demons. Daniel wasn't called to do that. God's got that. We're called to trust God, to pray. And then before I close this morning, I want to leave us with one last thing. And that's that although God loves to answer prayer, he doesn't just desire to answer your prayers. He desires to personally strengthen and comfort you, just like he did for Daniel. That's his heart for us. For the Messiah himself to give us comfort, our great high priest who empathizes with our weaknesses. When we accept Jesus' invite to come to him when we are burdened, when we are weary, he personally ministers to us when we take the time to spend with him. And he's not like a doctor with poor bedside manner whose only goal is to try to fix your problem. Jesus wants to give you hope that he's come, that he's victorious, and that he wants to personally minister to you in the space you're in. So let's just spend a couple of moments before the Lord, giving to him what's on our hearts, asking him to personally minister to us, praying. If there's bold prayer requests you want to ask him, let's do that together, and then I'm going to pray for us, and the band's going to come up and lead us. God, we come this morning thanking you that you hear our prayers and that you love it when we are people who trust you. And we want to trust you this morning, and we want to ask you boldly, God, to hear and answer our prayers. And our prayers, some of them may be the same and some of them are different. But that you, God, would hear, that you would dispatch your angels to fight the battle on our behalf. That our prayers would influence things physically. But also, God, that it wouldn't just be about us asking you for great things, but that you, Jesus, like you did for Daniel on that day, would personally minister to us in the space we're in. that you would touch us, comfort us, you who's able to empathize with our weaknesses. And just like Daniel needed to be prepared for a great vision, God, we may need to be prepared for the works that you have prepared in advance for us. Won't you prepare us, Lord, personally, minister to us, courage and strengthen us again. We need you, Lord. We fight on our knees in prayer. In Jesus' name, amen.